Let's see. Okay, so in theory, we had just actually began with streaming at a certain point. I guess I like head butted my microphone and turn it off. So I apologize, not very professional. But as I said in our first podcast, we had one comment that our audio is puke worthy, and we are self sabotaging ourselves. So we're working to set up in our Mac with OBS a virtual MIDI interface, so we can plug in other Logic or Reaper or whatever. But so far, we're encountering a lot of problems. So this is the best I can do with the microphone right now. And please remember, I am not Logan Paul or Mr. Beast or all of those great podcasters that probably do their podcast without even their real voices, and it sounds very super professional. So we do the best we can, and this is also live. So moving on from that, last time we did have one positive comment, and unfortunately I talked about it a long time on the piece. I did have to eliminate because I turned the audio off. Genius that I am. But we have always from Excelaus Legale 8534 talking about a book I read a long time ago, Pierre Macaré's Hegel or Spinoza. And he states that is a very good contribution in the fight against Hegel from the Althusserian side. So we all know that if we are Deleuzian, as for Deleuze, Hegel was obviously the enemy, and Deleuze was really one of the few philosophers that you get the sense that Deleuze really hated. This book is by Pierre Macaire, who was a student and colleague of Althusser. Wrote this book, which is very interesting. I would recommend it. So once again, it's called Hegel or Spinoza, and once again, we're in this whole period in the 60s in France where you have this issue of the ideal dialectic by the part of Hegel, which was reinterpreted by Marx, reversing the dialectic into a material dialectic, and it I think in philosophy it would be very interesting to look into that. So obviously, Hegel is saying, contradictions are resolved on the transcendental and therefore ideal plane, and then they are kind of actualized in history in these great cycles of revolutions and Napoleon, and then the Jacobins, and then Napoleon, Le Trois, and Marx wants to reverse that, and obviously because the proletariat is very dear to Karl Marx, and you have machines that evolve materially from simple carts to machines for textiles, to machines for printing, eventually for machines for building cars, eventually to robots which begin to replace the worker, etc. So even there, like studying the relationship between Marx and Hegel and the dialectic is already interesting in itself, and I think also relevant to what we've been looking at, in these last few podcasts. And to close up quick, the other part of this comment is my guess reason why Deleuze and Guattari decoupled from Althusser, and as I said before, I know a little bit about the relation between Deleuze and Althusser. Between Guattari and Althusser, I know very little to nothing, so I'm not informed if that was something they together. But I'm sure they shared things, so it had to be kind of a shared opinion. And their decoupling from Althusser was his behavior during the 68 uprising when students wrote the À quoi sert Althusser on the walls. So, once again, not too sure about that, but not because I don't believe it. It's just I'm kind of ignorant on the subject, and we'll look into it. We have À quoi sert Althusser. I'm sorry to annihilate. I'm looking like if my microphone goes black, someone send me a message and tell me to turn it back on, because before I just I think with my nose I shut it down. But à quoi sert Althusser literally means like what's the use of Althusser. I think that's my best translation, but if you have a better translation, I repeat, please send it to me, and I would be interested. But for me, à quoi sert Althusser? What is what's the point without Althusser? No, at this point in 1968, when the students are barricaded in the streets and throwing firebombs against the police, etc., etc. So. Once again, a very good and interesting comment, and I would encourage everyone to read Macaré's Hegel or Spinoza. And for me, I tend a little bit more to Martial Guerrou, but Martial Guerrou is like really, really, really super heavy going, and this whole relationship. Between Hegel, Deleuze, and Marx, in the context of what we've been talking about, I believe is quite important. So an interesting book to look at. And what I want to do is jump back, if I'm even capable at this point, being that I wasted an hour talking with my microphone shut off, but that doesn't surprise me. But let me see if I can dig up our original article, because I think a lot of the questions at this point are becoming quite interesting, and I don't want to cross my tracks and repeat myself, because those few of you that watch us and watch more than 10 seconds obviously have a lot of patience, and I do not want to abuse that by not being capable of identifying what I have already read to you. So I think we spoke about last time about Foucault, another huge, in my opinion, complicated issue. I think this is where we want to start, right here. Okay, because here we are talking, I think we spoke, if not the last appointment, the one before, with Gilles Deleuze's relation to Althusser, and our kind of, superficial conclusion on YouTube here was kind of, that Deleuze was kind of more interested in Althusser because of his embracement of a lot of concepts from Spinoza, that kind of Deleuze was more interested in Althusser. And then we talk about an early and late Althusser, meaning that obviously the later Althusser was kind of not the same as he was before, and this would have to be researched, and I'm sure it has been, but I'm sure the late Althusser appropriated a lot of stuff from Deleuze, and he wasn't the same person as before, and kind of, I think the point is Deleuze did not get too much out of that relationship. Right now we're going to look into a great question, which is posed to Anne Sauvagnargues, and I will get it up on this page ASAP. And here we go here. Perfect. I don't know if we can see that from the top. No, hang on, just to be clear, we need to be as clear as possible. I'm talking into the microphone. This is a question posed by the interviewer to Anne Sauvagnargues, and this is the question posed to her. So, if Althusser is one of the points of contact between Deleuze and Guattari, so at least the interviewer is implying here is that Althusser was a point of contact, and you could kind of replace, in my opinion, Althusser, but you can't do it. But I always repeat, you have to try and simplify things to understand, and then you go back, and then you understand them more. You go back third time, fourth time, fifth time, and then you get all the richness, of the levels here. So let's just say if Althusser, and I'm going to say Althusser / Marxism is one of the points of contact between Deleuze and Guattari, on the one hand, and let's change it, at the Marxism of the time. On the other hand, the question of the Freud-Marx relationship is just as central. So here, things are going to get a little bit more complicated. We have to keep in mind that in the 1960s in France, in the intellectual circles, as we all should know, I hope my microphone is still working, was Freud and Marx were very, 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 very fashionable in post-war France, especially in the 1960s. So on the one hand, a proximity of problem does not prevent Deleuze and Guattari. So the realtor, on the one hand, a proximity of this problem, the problem between Freud and Marx, which is already complicated, but it's not something that we should just skip over, because we already know from the logic of sense that Deleuze is very, very interested in psychology and psychoanalysis, and then kind of enlarging the field of psychology into philosophy. Psychology is something which starts out in the 19th century, like we said before, not with Freud, but from a few predecessors, but kind of brought to the forefront in cultural, intellectual discussions by Freud himself. So therefore, this whole problem that was already floating around there, this relationship between Freud and Marx, is something we're gonna find in the anti-Oedipe, So and Deleuze and Guattari will be obviously creating, reinterpreting, changing those things. But these are questions like let's say libidinal desire for technology, libidinal desire for money, etc., etc. Now, those are kind of questions that were outside of the sphere of pure philosophy in itself. Immanuel Kant, Descartes, Hegel, even Nietzsche. I mean, philosophy was not established as this. Nietzsche might be a little bit, outside of what I'm saying, but this is also one interesting point that in this whole issue we're talking about between the relationship between Deleuze, Guattari, and Karl Marx, that Freud is not something to be ignored. Althusser would appear to be there, and he's more on the side of not on the side, but his sphere of work, let's say, is more limited towards Spinoza and Marx, like it was with Tony Negri. Obviously, Deleuze had a much wider philosophical background, and was obviously, after a logical sense, very interested in pushing philosophy into this whole realm of psychology and psychoanalysis. And so we have to keep in mind, I know it's kind of it's kind of getting a little bit complicated, but we have a lot of people, and that's the way it was. So on the one hand, a proximity of problem does not prevent Deleuze and Guattari from having a very critical relationship with Freudo Marxism. But on the other hand, and Jacques Lacan will enter into this picture, unlike the Lacanian readings of Marx emerging in the 1970s, and which will systematically privilege the Lacan of the symbolic unconscious. Here we're taking a deep dive here. Deleuze and Guattari immediately take a tangent by turning towards or even provoking Lacan's latest research around a real unconscious. So once again, we have a symbolic unconscious, and then we have a real unconscious. I'm simplifying and repeat. If we even have any viewers, no, first question. Second question, if those viewers, know much more than I do, and I'm sure many people do, they wouldn't be watching us. So if this could be helpful to anyone, like I always repeat, we have to simplify, and then you come back. At the beginning, you simplify, make it easy to understand, and then you will come back again and come back again. I've already said that. So we know that Jacques Lacan, the psychoanalyst, the heir to Sigmund Freud, Guattari was his best student until they argued, had always researched a symbolic unconscious. However, later on, he moved towards also a concept of the real unconscious. So the only point I would say here is, if we think about virtual, actual, we're all kind of here in today, but I don't want to talk about today, but you can kind of feel the aura here. We're talking about Hegel, ideal dialectic, meaning things are resolved on the transcendental plane, and then they're just kind of played out on the actual plane. Deleuze, the Bergson, the virtual, the actual. With Lacan, we have the symbolic unconscious, and then we have the real unconscious. So I just, if I could convey anything to you, it would be at this point, it's kind of, these are things that were all kind of floating out around there, which a lot of the authors we're talking about picked up. So Lacan's latest research around a real unconsciousness, and by proposing the first Lacanian Marxist attempt, and let's just shoot our arrow because we don't want to shoot arrows here, but well before that, which is attributed today to Zizek. So bravo, hats off to you, to the author of this article today, that which Slavoj Žižek maintains in Lacan in his relation to Marxist was done well before, but you can get away with that today, given the climate we live in. To overcome, let's see if I have any more text. This is actually so. This is Sauvagnargues who's already kind of criticizing. I'm not going to say bad words. A little bit Zizek, and I'm sure Zizek has done offered very much to Lacanianism, Marxism, and philosophy. So I apologize to overcome the aporias of Freudo Marxism. How do you understand this? No, this I'm sorry, this is not attributed to Anne Sauvagnargues. This is the interviewer. So, how do you first understand this enterprise begun in Anti Oedipus and its paradoxical support for the singular figure of Wilhelm Reich, which is a new figure to what we're talking about? We will look into him. But once again, very, very, very difficult question. But what we do know is we're saying, okay, we know that Althusser uh, was a point of interest shared by Deleuze and Guattari. At the same time, Marxism in general. On the other hand, we have this whole relationship between Freud and Marx, which was very fashionable in the 1960s in France. So, no, the question is on one hand, Deleuze and Guattari are very critical of the relationship between Freud and Marx, but on the other hand, unlike the Lacanian readings of Marx, which come in the 70s, which will systematically privilege the Lacan of the symbolic unconscious, Deleuze and Guattari take a tangent by turning towards or even provoking Lacan's latest research around a real unconscious. So, forget about Zizek at this point, and let's just think really simply, what is the question? Because that's a really loaded question. It's saying, okay, Deleuze and Guattari, they kind of they met in the 70s. They had this point of contact, and Althusser, but above all, Marxism was the most interesting point that originally brought them together. However, at the same time, as they had eventually decided, to write together, they had this whole issue of confronting the relationship between Freud and Marx, which was very fashionable at the time. However, at the same time, they were beginning to write. Obviously, Freud and Lacan Freud and Marx had passed away at that time. Then we had Jacques Lacan, who began reading about Marxism, and in which, for whatever reason, Lacanianism, it's the symbolic unconscious, which will become like the most popular. However, Deleuze and Guattari, principally writing L'Anti-Oedipe, will try and subvert this. So, like I said, at least for me, that we know I'm absolutely not a genius. I have to simplify things, break them down, and then go back. And sometimes you have to, I think in philosophy, you just have to go back and say it again and again until you can get it in a really simple way. So let's do it another time. We are Deleuze and Guattari met, and Althusser was a part of the attraction to one another, and they decided to write stuff. So, in the meantime, in those times when they decided to write, a philosopher, not really Marxist, who had a very peripheral Deleuze relationship to Marxism with Guattari, a convinced Marxist and a militant in PC, the Communist Party in France at the time. So they get together. But when they get together, this whole France is saturated. All the intellectual circles and universities are talking about the relationship between Freud and Marx. No, so obviously, anyone that has read Lantia Edipa, Deleuze, and Guattari, being that they are creating a individual author composed of both of them, are going to use Deleuze's knowledge of the history of philosophy, with the psychology, psychoanalysis of Guattari, and also I think the Marxism of Guattari, and they are going to attack this whole concept of Freudo Marxianism. However, at the same time, oh, life is complicated. I know this is complicated, but I'm sure we all find ourselves in kind of crazy, complicated situations, and we just have to deal with issues one by one. At the same time, when they were going against Freud and Marx, Lacan was starting to, in the 1970s, getting into and writing about the symbolic unconscious, and therefore, following their critique on the relationship between Freud and Marx, they were also going to kind of attack Lacan himself by uh, attaching themselves, not 100%, more or less, to Lacan's research around the real unconscious. And hard to explain, but the relationship between Gilles Deleuze and Lacan, and also Guattari and Lacan, is very, very complicated uh, at the same time. But the important thing is just to know that Deleuze meets Guattari. When they meet in every university, in every cafe, the cool students are sitting there smoking, what were they called, Galois, and saying, talking about, oh yeah, Freud, desire, Marxism, machines, blah, blah, blah. And that was the environment in which Deleuze and Guattari had met, and therefore they were heavily critical of that. At the same time, Lacan was writing uh, new things about the symbolic unconscious and the real unconscious. Not the same thing, but just think ideal, real, virtual, actual, even if it's not the same thing, but just to simplify. And so they are going to be attacking the orthodoxy of the time, and they're going to be writing against the popular interpretation of the relationship between Freud and Marx, and at the same time, they are going to kind of subtly attack Lacan, who was at the time uh, very, very intelligent. Jacques Lacan might have been not a great person, but at least Deleuze kind of had a relationship where, how can you say, there was kind of a respect there, no? Even by, I imagine, wasn't there. I'm not Feliz Guattari, but he was a student. I imagine they had a little bit of respect for Lacan, so they kind of played around with him and tried to subvert him. But I do think they found a lot of really interesting things in Lacan. And finally, I'm going to shut it down because it's Monday night, and I'm sure we're all back to school, getting back into the rhythm of autumn. I am going to finally get to the most important thing, which is Anne Sauvagnargues' answer to this question. And let's do that. Oh my god. That is a pretty long answer, I think. Let's try and do one paragraph. We'll shut down and come back tomorrow. Otherwise, correctly so, you guys are going to get pretty bored with all this stuff, which is already pretty complicated. So, no, obviously, I messed up the language, which is totally bizarre. What in goddamn. Let's try again. Too many characters. What a shame. Let's try and cut out some characters. My apologies for the delay, but everything can be in real time. How many characters are over by how many? No, still pissed off. Okay, so break this down into a bunch of pieces, otherwise we have a limit. Let's try and getting this out of here and see if yeah. Hello. No, not even that. But now it's too little. Come on, baby. Dude. They are treating us so poorly. So I will sweep this up. Let's get it out of here. At least begin to talk because it's late as hell over here. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, so this is her answer to the question. And my apologies, but we're live here, so we're gonna do what we need to do. This is precisely a point on which I do not at all No, where did I lose it? Oh my god, let me shut it. Ah, oh. Okay, so oh my god, anyone, I'm not, I, I'm totally embarrassed. I've shut my freaking microphone off again the second time. I have to do something about that. I don't know when or where it went off, but we are in heavily complicated terrain. I'm just reading the last part because I do not know how long this microphone has been off. But with Marx, this time and against Lacan, language is not enough to code the unconscious. First, any language implies a regime of production that is no longer symbolic or structural. We find here the polemic against structure, which bears full force against the theory of the signifier in Lacan. So far, up until this point, I find this to be just it's obviously extremely interesting. There's all sorts of things to look into. As you have seen, like my initial reaction to some things, I was kind of like, well, no, I'm not quite sure about that. But where we get to points like we have, so with Lacan and against Freud, desire is coded by the unconscious. So therefore, in her opinion, for Freud, desire was coded by the conscious. And very complicated. Let's do one thing because I don't know how much I've lost here. If anyone has the patience to skip and come back, let's go and just do one more part of the interview because I'm pretty. This answer we're gonna have to pick it up tomorrow or the next time. But this is pretty. Sheesh. Pretty complicated. So let's look into this. This is the next part of Anne's answer. So even the question in itself was complicated enough, but her answer, I mean, obviously, I have to say she's not interested. And if we go on, the unconscious is machinic, not so much coded as machined. It does not express itself in abstract mathemes or any language of the unconscious for specialists, which would appear to go against Jacques Lacan. But so the tripartition, symbolic, imaginary, real, which redeploys in Lacan the three Freudian instances of the superego, the ego, and the idea, excuse me, by rationalizing in logical places the Freudian topic still psychological, individualized on the figures of the family. The parental superego, the civilized ego, the idea to be educated. So there, we know that that part of that critique of Freud, which is very valid in the 1960s, meaning daddy, mommy, and me, the Oedipal triangle, excuse me, today in 2024 has been not entirely, but it's continually being dissolved by there's no military service, schools can be more and more online, divorces, families, gender issues, so the idea of the family as being symbolic, daddy, mommy, and me, we know that has changed very much. So she says it responds to determined mode of production It is understood only according to the determined historical mode of a social mode of production. The Viennese family, which Freud takes for a nature of man. I say of man, Oedipus is masculine centered. So I'm going to shut off right here because otherwise, long podcasts obviously don't people get bored, and I understand them, especially with all this kind of stuff. And is saying in the end, patriarchy, and basically that it's a criticism of the patriarchy. No surprise there, and no criticism of that either. I think she's correct. However, I'm not sure what to do at this point. I repeat, next time I will put up again the link for this article. I'm going to put it up right here. All you have to do is go to this is actually a book, but you have the PDF version. But I'm just going to give you enough because I repeat again, if you're interested, go pick it up yourself. And this is Deleuze, Guattari et Marx par Isabelle Garo et Anne Sauvagnargues. And pick it up if you're interested. That is a good book to put into your library. I repeat, books are great. You can buy some ebooks, but today, let me show you this. I'm going back full vinyl. So today, my Smith's vinyl album, Louder Than Bombs, showed up. And gentlemen, compared to Spotify, I mean, you just get the booklets, the backings, all the lyrics, the A sides, the B sides. It sounds 1,000 times better on your record player than on your computer speakers. So back to vinyl and back to books. But if you want, you can find this published in PDF format on Cairn, don't know, CARN, Cairn info. Just go to the site or put it in Google. Deleuze, Guattari, Marx, par Isabelle Garo and Sauvagnargues, Cairn info. That's the website. You can find it, look at it. I'm not sure if you can download it, and they're only giving us a certain number of pages here. So in this podcast, we're looking more or less at less than 20 pages. So here you have a whole book on this subject, which, as we can see, is highly complicated, but in my opinion, very, very interesting for understanding, like the title of the book, the relationship to Marx, but also, as we saw in this answer by Anne Sauvagnargues, kind of a whole bunch of central issues that revolve around anti-Oedipe. And so I think if there was a point to this evening's podcast, is that in as complicated as things got the last few times, now, we're getting into Freud, psychoanalysis, Lacan, and we're getting in the field becomes much richer. And Sauvagnargues is made, I find this pretty critical, but the unconscious is machinic, not so much coded as machined. The tripartition, symbolic, imaginary, real. So this, keep in mind, this whole thing is a detour. I do not want to, we could spend centuries going over all of this. So the most important thing is pick this up yourself if you're interested and go over it. We will try and hack through in the next week, I guess, at this point, through the next few pages, because it is very provocative and interesting. It kind of forces us, at least it forces me, to rethink or think or rethink a lot of these things. And I'm going to sign off right now. It's super late. As always, it is a pleasure. My apologies for the usual messes. And have a great week and hope to see you soon. And thank you for the support. Take care.